All right, we'll get started with today's webinar. I'm Allison LaForgia, the managing editor of the content studio at HousingWire. And today our topic is how AI is improving the entire home buying journey for consumers. Today's webinar is hosted by Home Genius Real Estate. A few housekeeping items before I turn things over to today's moderator. Today's an interactive webinar. Please send questions for the panelists through the Q&A icon that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We will be having a dedicated Q&A portion of the webinar towards the end, so send your questions at any time and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar will be recorded. HousingWire will send the recording out early next week. Now, today's moderator is Dave McCormick. Dave, I'm going to turn things over to you to introduce the rest of our panel.
Okay, great. Thank you very much and welcome everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on how AI is improving the home buying journey for consumers. My name is Dave McCormick. I'm Senior Vice President of Sales at Home Genius Real Estate. I work with lenders and financial institutions on consumer engagement solutions as a driver of new leads, all delivered through platforms available through Home Genius Real Estate. I've been in the mortgage and I checked this math earlier. I've been in the mortgage and real estate industry for 32 plus years now. Hard to believe. I just celebrated 10 years with Radian in January. And Home Genius. Excited to host today's important session for you. And I'm joined today by two seasoned veterans in the space who will help us better understand how AI is impacting the industry, the consumer experience, as well as their insights into what's to come throughout 2024 and beyond. Before we jump into the content, let me go ahead and introduce these gentlemen. First, we have Steve Gainsler, my colleague. Steve has held senior corporate roles in mortgage finance, real estate, and technology. As Senior Vice President of Innovation and Strategy for Home Genius Real Estate, he's responsible for ensuring that innovation is a differentiator and creates value for our customers. Steve leads a highly talented team that's charged with the development of data-driven analytic products, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, and generative AI that power the Home Genius platforms and services that I'm fortunate to be able to talk about to our lender and financial services customers every day. Additionally, Steve and his team are responsible for the identification and review of opportunities that expand the distribution of or enhance the features in our products through strategic partnerships. Next, I'm happy to also welcome Vishal Madhavan from Boston Consulting Group. Vishal is Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group, where he's a member of the financial institutions and insurance practice areas. In this role, Vishal serves as clients in the mortgage and real estate ecosystem, from mortgage originators and servicers to service providers across data, title, insurance, and technology. He advises his clients on topics including strategy, operating model, transformation, cost, and of course, AI. On the AI front, he's partnered with clients as they explore use cases, develop their generative AI roadmaps, set up their operating models, and begin building out solutions. Okay, so that was a mouthful, but you get the idea. We have the experts here in the room, and you're in good hands. So before we jump in, by way of teeing this up, I'm going to ask you, Steve, if you wouldn't mind spending just a couple minutes kind of level setting the topic for the audience today, maybe share some common terms and maybe some common misconceptions around AI that might exist, and anything else you might want to share by way of getting us going.
Sure. And thanks for hosting us, Dave. Congratulations on your long-term anniversary.
Right.
And thanks to the audience, frankly, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate in this webinar. I think I speak for the three of us, and hope that you'll find this conversation not just fun and interactive, but actually informative. The big takeaway. So as Dave asked, I'm going to start with a little bit reflecting, right? Really by seeing such a profound potential impact of a particular technology in an industry and what we've seen through AI in the last, call it 24 months. And change seems like it's accelerating at this point at a faster pace than ever before. And I think it's because it is. And so for the what I call data scientists that are participating in this, or technologists, that can be terrifying, right? FOMO is rampant. Hype is at an all-time high. And so in an area where I think there's just constant information overload, it's really almost impossible to digest everything that we're seeing and reading and hearing. And so I'll steal a couple minutes, David, at your authorization to set the stage with some terms. In finance, there's an old adage that if you ask 10 economists the same question, you get 11 answers. And that's basically a reflection of the lack of consensus that happens when things are are challenging and complex. And I think that AI is one of those areas where we hear the terms and we use the terms. And so I thought it'd be important just take 2 seconds and just kind of go through them. This is a diagram, a schematic that is not necessarily unique to me, but I've seen it and we use it to describe kind of the subdomains within our artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence really is a process of using technology to emulate human behavior, right? We're trying to get it to learn things, to make decisions, to solve complex problems. That is kind of the writ large umbrella of the technologies that we'll be talking about today. Within there, there's the first subdomain, which we call machine learning. And this is basically leveraging advanced algorithms to detect patterns within large data sets. And this is kind of like the extension of the old econometrics world into advanced technologies using broader algorithms. Many of these algorithms have been around for 50 or 60 years. We just didn't have the computer technology or the data to be able to leverage it in a way that was valuable like it is today. Underneath the machine learning domain, we have a subdomain called deep learning. And so deep learning is where we're using neural networks to effectively emulate or simulate the brain's behavior. And so there's layers of networks that do simulations on large data sets. And those are ones that are kind of the next layer of trainings for models in the artificial intelligence space. And then we have generative AI, right? It is the hype. It is the new kid on the block. And this subdomain is really focused on generating content, like text or code or images, based on these what we call large language models. These are very substantially sized models that are generally trained. They're just broad purpose general models that are all able to detect then patterns. And importantly, they detect the patterns without explicit instruction. And that's a big differentiator in the space, because now you can just really dump the kitchen sink into a model set and essentially through some supervision, allow that to make predictions on things that it wasn't actually asked to predict on. And so those are kind of the concepts. So Gen AI, because we have these interfaces like ChatGPT that are being put on top of these large language models, have created an environment where they are very natural, right? They're natural in understanding, they're conversational. So it's not just like your old Alexa, which is in the deep learning category of natural language processing, where you're asking a question and it might just stop right there. These are conversations that can be had based on the generative AI tools and generating the content. And so those are the tool sets. Because it is so new, it has led to a lot of questions. And I can't tell you the number of questions. I'm sure, Michelle, you get them all the time as well, around concerns that you have as a result of this environment. And so let me just dispel a few of them, or at least talk about a few of them. So the first is that AI is going to take your job, right? And I don't think that is anywhere near. There's no dystopian universe that's going to happen anytime soon, as a result of generative AI. In fact, surveys have clearly shown that consumers really appreciate and value expertise. And that is, every survey we see shows that. And so I don't think that's an issue. I do think what will happen is there'll be a shift in how labor forces are augmented as a result of generative AI, right? The conversational component does allow for a transition potentially upstream in some of these tools away from maybe just sort of low-skilled type of replacement into the more professional realm. But the reality is it'll be augmentative, right? And so we want to keep a human in the loop, as we say, because as we've seen already with some of these models, they can hallucinate, they can lie, they can be wrong. And so I think there's not much chance that in the short term it eliminates positions. It just augments the expertise and allows people to do things that they do better, right? It allows them to do better than they are. The second is that it's cost prohibitive. So this is an interesting trade. Historically, Dave, in the tech space, right, around some of these models, they had what we call open source models, which are models that were developed by institutions or individuals and then handed out in the wild for everyone to use, typically for free. They enhance the models, they make them better. It's kind of a cooperative. With the large language models that are being created today, the cost has grown so significantly that now these tools have gone from what we call open source to in many cases open access, which means the models are still available, but they're available for a fee. And so when you say are they cost prohibitive, there are some really, really good tools that anybody can use kind of outside the box and can be very powerful in your businesses. But there's a trade-off. In the past, there's open source. You had to have developers that would develop things around it. And now you have some of these tools that might actually cost you something, but come with some pre-trainings that make it easier to embed or to use. And the last thing I'll just say is then around the tech savviness, it's kind of an offshoot of that. Can I use it, right? Can I use AI? The AI you see today, right, even with the hallucinations we're seeing and things like that, some of the concerns with Gen AI, it's still the early generations. And so it will only get better. And so the way that many of these tools have been now developed to be more conversational and more natural in the Gen AI space, make them more accessible to many more people because you're not trying to get behind the scenes and code it. And so while the large language models themselves are still requiring of quite a bit of data science and data engineering skills to actually operationalize or put into products, many of the kind of low code or no code options like the chat GPT componentry make it available so that consumers can and professional users can access these tools in ways they just simply could before. So probably the big three concerns that we see historically are around job insecurity, right, cost, and technology requirements.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Super helpful. All right, so let's jump in then. Steve, I'm going to stick with you for the time being. And if you think about AI, it's certainly made its way into just about every industry out there, but specific to ours, right? How have you seen AI work its way into the everyday dialogues and conversations that consumers have with market participants like the loan officers, the real estate agents, appraisers, inspectors, what have you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll take this from the side because I suspect most of the folks in this call, while potentially being consumers, are also professionals, right? And so I want to be clear that while the title of this of webinar is really about how AI is changing the home buyer journey, it's changing the journey for everybody. Okay, I mean this is kind of where we begin with it. It's going to affect loan officers, underwriters, agents, right? Appraisers, attorneys, title specialists, right? Go up and down the line, inspectors, everyone is going to be impacted. And so everyone is in the process of kind of altering their business model to adapt to the opportunities that may be there to allow them to do two things. On the one side is creating efficiencies in their business. And this is kind of the natural growth of technology. We've seen it since the dawn of time. When technology comes out, we look for ways to leverage it to make our business more efficient and more conducive to building those relationships with our customers. And so in that space, we're seeing that already in a lot of the adjustments to business models. Gen AI is pushing the envelope, right, to make it happen potentially faster, right, or at least a lot of folks may require folks to look at it more seriously. But the reality is we're seeing customer service, right, whether it's the kind of front of shop versus the back end of shop, if you're a servicer versus a loan officer or a real estate agent or an attorney or somebody, an inspector, appraiser, there are components there where artificial intelligence is already in place, whether it's chatbots, robotic process automation, right, RPA, data augmentation movements, where you're actually trying to use additional data to improve the predictions that you're making. Traditional AI around what we call like propensity modeling. We're trying to forecast what a consumer might do, whether it's an event-driven episode or it's something that is more based on economics. So there's lots of areas where we're already seeing artificial intelligence and the big circle, right, impact these industries in a positive way on the cost side. I think where we're also starting to see more and more is on that interaction side, right? And how does the service provider present themselves to the consumer in a way that allows that consumer to benefit and therefore create that deeper relationship? And so we're seeing a lot of that in the way that all participants are trying to what I'll call move up the funnel. Right, they're trying to make sure they create that contact point, and there's a lot of conversation around maintaining that contact point. Yeah. And so, how they go about maintaining that contact point, kind of different for different industries. But I think it's both on the operational side and then on the consumer engagement side.
Okay, so a quick follow-up to that. So AI, machine learning, certainly can help financial institutions create more loyalty and brand stickiness. But how do you see that impacting the experience or relationship that consumers have with those institutions over time?
Yeah, I mean, this is where consumers seek value, right? And if you offer it, they will be loyal, right? You can compete on price if you'd like to, and that tends to push transactions as opposed to deeper loyalty. For long-term loyalty, though, you must create value. And so how does that work? I think from an AI perspective, it's going to be what I'll call the uber personalization of these experiences. And so if you think about personalization as it exists today, so we think about personalization has existed, right? We always try to do better and better. So personalization right now has historically been things like I get a mailer, right, from a real estate agent that I've used in the past or is marketing to me, and it has my Dear Steve's, right, and that has been the traditional thought of like personalization. Or maybe I get some market information from a local loan officer on trends and things that have happened in my market over the last, or my zip code over the last 6 or 12 months. These are things that have been, I think, the traditional expectation for personalization. And I think that the personalization going forward to create this loyalty is going to be very, very different, right? It's going to be kind of powerful algorithms that are analyzing both individual borrower, behavioral data, behavioral patterns, financial information, and aligning that with data patterns that they see throughout their bigger enterprise of information. I think when you do that, then you can use artificial intelligence in a way that creates this kind of uber personalization in that relationship, and that does create loyalty. If you could imagine a scenario where you are a consumer and you just found out you're about to have a child, or you just had a new child, and a service provider knew that. They knew, where you were living now. They knew the size of your home, the size of your family, that this just happened. It's about not just what they deliver to you, but when they deliver to you and how they deliver to you. And that's where the uber personalization comes in. If I knew all that and I sent you a piece of information or a marketing piece that said, hey, congratulations, we know you just had your third child and you're in a one-bedroom house. Here are some options that we can help you with. That becomes a different level. Consumers, right? We know this. The stats show us consumers, they don't want 50 phone calls, right? We all tune it out quickly. And so by uber personalizing the experience to that consumer, you actually run the benefit or the opportunity to reduce your acquisition costs and build loyalty simultaneously. And so it's not about the value that you can just create by putting Dear Steve on it. It's really about understanding that consumer at a completely different level based on leveraging your data assets in a different way, and then using these powerful algorithms to allow you to kind of predict, right, in patterns, what's going to happen, and then make that available to them at that point in time. I think that's going to be the key driver, right, to loyalty. We know that lenders, they want to be situated in a way that they can take advantage of this. And I think that in the entire ecosystem, lenders might be in the position that is best suited, because it is going to be about leveraging longer term data that you have about a consumer and putting it into their hands in a different way. And so longer term existing relationships, right, trusted relationships in many situations. And so while, right, appraisers can use these tools in different ways, inspectors, agents, right, all down the line, I do think that there is an opportunity that might be more unique to the lender community than to others, given their larger data sets.
Yeah, I would agree. Makes sense. Vishal, from your perspective, can you just touch a little bit on the impact your team is seeing on how generative AI is impacting the way customers interact with other areas of their journey, from insurance to real estate and what have you?
Sure. Happy to. First off, I'd say just to contextualize what we're seeing in 2023 versus this year in the mortgage and real estate ecosystem, and I'll speak broadly around financial services and insurance. So last year, I think we saw a lot of players along the value chain really focused on picking smaller use cases, really trying to figure out, can I make this work? There were really a lot of just internal proof points or test cases, often with more of an internal employee productivity focus as the first step. This year, we're seeing a bolder take by many folks around how can I transform a function end-to-end or a role altogether, or stitch together a few use cases. So folks are thinking about how might I redo a process end-to-end leveraging generative AI? How do I think about the end-to-end user experience when I think about the consumer? If I think further out to even a place like banking, I think you're seeing folks think about how do I reimagine what portfolio management in that process looks like? How can I leverage generative AI to help with the spreading of financials? What gets flagged for a human review, all with a human still in the loop, to Steve's point earlier. If I think about sort of what we're seeing in action now, I'll draw on a couple of examples. One is a lot of activity on the contact center and call center front. For example, think of a mortgage servicer using Gen AI to reduce call volumes, enabling more self-service versus the need to call in. And for, in their case, in many cases, a lower margin business, that can be very material. How can you start to predict the intent of the customer call, route calls to the right agents to help reduce the need to reroute? And so when you think from a customer experience perspective, you can imagine getting routed to the right person in the first place is huge. On top of that, you can leverage now an internal chatbot to give the agent the knowledge base and help them get to first time and quicker resolution without the need for escalation. When you think about from the mortgage originator side, how do you leverage AI and generative AI to start to now compile all of the requirements that are needed for a certain loan product? How can you figure out which products a consumer qualifies for, which is a prompt to put in front of the LO to really say, these are the products that make most sense for the consumer. It helps pare down the product breadth and helps with matching a consumer to a single product. And then maybe lastly, just from a B2B perspective, you're seeing generative AI being used around things like vendor management based on a regulatory framework. You can look at whether vendor contracts adhere to certain regulations and determine essentially a composite score for how well a given vendor lines up to a regulatory environment and your needs from a vendor. So I think we're seeing a lot of inroads up and down the value chain, especially in the last 3 to 4 months, Dave, to your question.
Yeah, thanks, Vishal. Yeah, it'll be great if they could come up with a way where I punch in my phone number to the automated assistant and I don't get asked to repeat that information later in the conversation, right? So Steve, we've talked about how AI is impacting the way consumers interact with providers that they have, but how is AI currently improving the way consumers engage within their own personal home buying or selling journeys to help them take control of that journey and be it from search all the way to owning the home of their dreams, et cetera, and beyond?
Yeah. You know this because we're colleagues. Like at Home Genius, we think about the experience kind of a continuum, right? We call it, search or find, evaluate, right, transact, and then own as the kind of lifetime circle, right? And it doesn't have to be in that order. I can stress the imagination. You could be an owner today and eventually you look for something else. You could be a renter today. You could be living at home still today. And so the journey that I think we're all trying to be a part of is a continuum. And I think first and foremost, kind of recognizing that is important. We see it obviously in a way that, along that continuum, think about search for a second, what search can do. Computer vision technologies are one area that we really do feel are a critical kind of bridge from the past into the future. And we have invested a significant amount of time and treasure in that space for that reason, right? We know that real estate transactions are emotional, they're optical, right? Dave, you and I can walk into the same house, we can look at it and we can have very different interpretations about what that house is, what the value is, right? What it looks like, et cetera. And so from a search perspective, we want to leverage computer vision in a way that creates that uber personalization that I was talking about, that, agents and other participants can provide that to their consumers. So we've built out these computer vision models. We've generated over 115 billion pieces of information about houses across the United States. And as agents present images, we generate about 800 pieces of information about every single house. And so think about that from a search experience. Traditionally, we're thinking about beds and bathrooms and square footage, but we haven't historically thought about making that, again, uber personalized and going in and be able to say, effectively, I want a south-facing house that has a front porch of stone and siding with a right side driveway. I want hardwood floors in my kitchen. I want tile in my bathroom. I want a screen porch in the back with a ceiling fan, right? On and on and on. Fireplace in my bathroom. And so leveraging computer vision skills, we can detect all that information about a property and then allow that to personalize that search experience for that consumer, right? We also have what we call reverse image search, which means, right, taking an image that somebody uploads into the system and allow that to drive the recommendation system. And so, right, I'm at Vishal's house at a cocktail party, and I love the new kitchen renovation he's done, right? My wife's driving down the street and she sees this wonderful front porch that she wants as a part of their search. And so uploading those, it's the Pinterest experience. And so creating those experiences for consumers is a way that, right, they are now owning that journey themselves, but being able to personalize it through technology tools that they're given. Valuation is the same, right? You think about the traditional valuation of properties. We take a whole bunch of information, right? We build a model, we generate a value, or an agent uses information in MLS, right? They look through and they use their brain model and they pick things out and say, these are the most comparable, right? Et cetera, et cetera. When we do this in a modeling format, we have like this called residual, right? It's a part of the prediction of a value that is not actually derived by the specific information you give, beds, bathroom, square footage. So the more data we can start pushing into these models, especially the computer vision type models and data, we can improve the accuracy of those valuations for consumers. And then consumers then can start to bridge the gap between what I'll call price and value. So price is just where the property is going to transact. Value is what that means to that consumer, both financially and emotionally. And if we can tap into that, right, buyers have that ability to really fine tune what they think a property that they're looking for is worth to them, right? Or if they're trying to list their property, their agent helps them, and by the list price, making sure that the properties out there that they're looking at are the same. And I think lastly, in the, I'll call that ownership category, right? This is a kind of a newer category for the consumer because the real estate transaction has historically kind of ended. But there's this open green field where consumers, and especially the younger generation that are not as attuned to being able to, right, do plumbing or light electrical or even probably change a tire, right? That, we have to support that as an industry writ large if you want to maintain loyalty over the long term. And so what types of services do you actually present or provide to consumers, either via marketplaces or, other experiences where you can tie in that home ownership experience where now I know what your appliances are and I can help you with a rebate or I can help you with a warranty item, right? Or tie back into your insurance provider. And so if you have to make a claim, right, there's a direct channel for it. Tie it back to the actual cost of, of materials, Home Depot, Lowe's, et cetera. Empowering that consumer to be able to figure out these things almost proactively, right? Getting them ahead of time. So I think all those experiences are ways that the consumer can leverage this AI technology in ways that simply just were not available, right, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, and you're right. I have a front row seat to the work you're doing in some of this space, and it's really amazing what you're able to provide consumers as it relates to some of these search and valuation experiences. So just a quick follow-up. So, it's often said, right, the purchase or sale of a home is one of the biggest investments anyone makes, in their lifetime. Can you talk a little bit, Steve, about the way consumers can engage can vary? And the difference between having to leverage a variety of cobbled resources out there when buying a home versus the benefit consumers may have if they had just one place, or they could help them get various stages of the home buying journey all together at once.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all know, I think everyone on this webinar probably knows the same thing. Like, there is no one size fits all when it comes to consumers, right? And so the challenge is to identify the right product for the market. We call it product market match, and then identify what are the resources, what are the tools that particular cohort segment, grouping needs to be successful. And historically, consumers have had to interact with a number of strangers, frankly, oftentimes, not all of them, but many times strangers, to consummate a purchase or sale of a piece of real estate. And frankly, I was thinking about this before when I was preparing, and I was trying to think of, is there another example of a transaction where there are upwards of a dozen potential unique participants that I have to engage with in order to make it happen? And I couldn't come up with one. So if someone has one, please put it in the chat, and I'll follow up on it. But I couldn't. Right? I challenged myself to do it. And so your question's a good one, right? Is there efficiency that technology and artificial intelligence in particular can bring to the equation that would make it more beneficial for a consumer on two different paths? One is on the path of cost effectiveness and affordability. Right. And so if we're able to streamline, let's say, data, and so data is not necessarily re-entered every single time, it's not in different data systems, it's better shared collaboratively, right? Then we can develop tools that allow for overall cost to come down, right? From an experience perspective, we can serve more from a lending space perspective, right? Serve more of the underserved potentially. And so there's that componentry of finding some consistency or on the data side. I also think from a tooling perspective, right now people go to a big portal, right, to go search for a property. Then they typically reach out to an agent who's going to help them with it on the buyer side, right? It's going to help them identify different options that they may want to go visit. And then you have to go and visit the property. There's a lot of pieces. We get into inspections, right? Title, right? All of the different componentries of it. That can be time consuming for consumers. Most consumers search for their home after hours, right? 7 o'clock at night and later. And so we do believe that there's an opportunity here to create more of a single ecosystem. It won't be the end to end of the entire experience, but consolidate the paths where different service providers can actively participate in engaging with that consumer in a much more collective way, as opposed to multiple different systems in front of the consumer. Now, the back ends for the service providers themselves may still be different, but it's all about the consumer experience, right? Again, if we're thinking about building loyalty to those consumers, what is the experience you're facing them? When they search, do they have to go somewhere else to make an offer, right? Are they negotiating on a different portal? We do think that giving consumers more choice, and ultimately, and I don't know if this will be an outcome of the NAR settlements that are actively, I'm sure, being discussed. If not, right, making payments and changes. Consumers, especially on the buy side, will likely be faced with an option of trying to identify what they want, when they want, and how they want it. Similar to the way that I was talking about, personalizing those experiences, where the consumer has the same thing. And so one consumer's need in a real estate transaction from any of those participants may be very different than others, right? First-time homeowners or purchasers have a very different need than the person who's an investor in real estate, or somebody who's bought or sold a couple houses, or one who's downsizing now. And so tailoring the experience through the technology to allow the consumer to kind of select when and where they interact with the technology versus the augmented expertise, I think is where the industry is going to continue to go. And I think that the Gen AI in particular, but AI more broadly, will drive a lot of that movement in that space. I don't know, Vishal, if you think similarly or...
Yeah, wholly agree. I'll just leave it at that, Steve.
Well, I think I'll pick on you though on that, just to elaborate a little further, if you don't mind, Vishal. Can you build a little bit on what your team is seeing in regards to how Gen AI is changing the customer experience from your lens?
Sure. And I'd say a lot of energy in the last, call it 3 to 6 months, around how there are now being contemplated enhancements or transformations around CX. And so maybe I'd highlight 4 areas for this group. One is, I would say, broadly around marketing and sales. And really, this is around identifying and acquiring prospects and new customers. We are starting to see more of this focus on that hyper personalization that Steve mentioned earlier, as it relates to marketing content being relevant, being timely, being quite personalized. You're starting to see sales resources receive sales trainings that are simulating client conversations to actually allow them to hold better client discussions. So if you think about the value of maybe not your A performer that's a realtor or agent, but how do you turn a C performer into B, a B into an A? So I think there's one bucket around that. The second is around the onboarding experience. So thinking about customer document and information validation. So faster time to ingestion around automated document processing, synthesizing documents for lender reviews, using a chatbot enabled onboarding tool to help answer questions as you're starting to interact with a lender or an institution for the first time. So there's definitely an element around how do I bring folks on the journey as they are starting to onboard in a faster, more helpful way. A third area I'd highlight is really around financial advice and providing research or deep financial analysis. So starting to use generative AI to synthesize investment reports and research to deliver more timely and relevant insights. Helping a relationship manager or an LO with a co-pilot that really assists the RM and the LO in their interactions and preparations for customer conversations, and just really helping with more tailored financial education content, if you will. And then lastly, as I alluded to earlier, around customer service, be it in a call center or beyond, how do I help with relationship management and customer service? Often using a generative AI driven chatbot to help customer service agents answer questions immediately, increasing that first time resolution, reducing the need for escalations. And then also, how do I follow up in a personalized way through often emails that might be around follow-up items, surveys, and the like, where it doesn't feel like this is the 1100th email I got from this institution, but it feels really targeted and relevant and specific to the interactions you've had with the institution recently. So a lot of exciting vectors, I think, broadly, where we're seeing energy in the last few months.
So that's really interesting. And you've touched on how AI is being used, across industries, to kind of improve the customer engagement and ease those employee workflows. But can you touch a little bit, Vishal, on talk about use cases across industries like insurance, brokerages, lenders, realtors?
Sure, absolutely. And maybe I'll talk through each of those buckets first around the real estate agent and the brokerage workflow to start with. And a lot of this is sort of still in the ideation phases. Some are starting to be implemented, but to give a sampling of where folks are thinking and are focused. One is really just developing a bunch of generative content with Gen AI. So thinking about hyper-personalized reports or property guides for buyers. How do I deliver intelligent market assessments for sellers that's hyper-relevant in a 2024 market where things change month to month? How do I keep that both timely and relevant in the market that we're in, be it in March, the summer, in the spring selling season, or the like? How do I think about auto-generating personalized realtor or closing documents based on a bunch of unstructured data? So really helping in that auto document generation front. How do I think about listings and using Gen AI to help in writing listings or modifying listing presentations if I'm a realtor? Think about using images to write the listing in the first place or enhance what's an existing listing based on newly found images as to what's been updated in a house, either outside or inside. Enhancing the property search, similar to what the Home Genius team is doing, having an opportunity to search for a 4-bedroom house with 3 baths, a pool, a white picket fence, etc. and have that conversational interface for the consumer, but also for the agent. If I think about conversational MLS opportunities to enable agents to better research properties and meet the customer or consumer needs more closely. And then lastly, in this area, I'd say just thinking about life cycle engagement. How do I think about assisting the agent in generating content to engage with consumers throughout their home ownership journey, not just around the buying or the selling of the home, but whether it's around remodeling or thinking about sort of their next move in life, if you will, with the being relevant and timely for them in a multi-year versus just a multi-week or multi-month journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Steve, shifting gears a little bit, we've certainly seen AI evolve significantly, especially in recent years with the launch of tools like chatbots, content creation tools, things you've kind of touched on along the way here. But can you provide some insight into the trends you're seeing in AI and how we might see it continue to evolve in coming years, especially as it pertains to our industry, and how that evolution will continue to impact and improve the customer experience?
Yeah, I'll probably bounce off of a couple of things that Vishal said just recently, because I actually agree with them entirely. I think on the operational side, I do think that a growing trend is leveraging internally some of the what I'll call assistant-based models. So the co-pilots, Microsoft, as they actually call it, co-pilot, tools that are embedded, generative AI tools that are embedded into existing products that allow for kind of easier adoption. And so whether it's, again, meeting summarizations that you have with your clients so you can pick out the next to-dos, whether it's generating emails, whether it's content generation, as Michelle mentioned, in other categories around listings and seller presentations and the like. I do think that there is a growing trend to gravitate towards kind of these prepackaged components that are just easier to adopt and test for most folks. I mean, I say this often because I'm going to say often, from a data science perspective, these are still models. And while we have this really amazing interface plopped on front of GPT-4 and GPT-3.5, et cetera, and all the other models, Meta's got theirs, Amazon's got theirs, everyone has them, the large language set. They're still models. And so there's a lot that needs to be done there. So I do think that adoption of those kind of prepackaged tools will continue to grow as a trend. And there'll be a lot of efficiencies that are through the HR departments, through finance, through legal, right? Beyond just the traditional email document summarization, even document summarization facing the consumer, right? So consumer gets these massive documents when it goes to, closing, and having tools that can easily summarize them for them and pull out the most important and relevant and pertinent terms, definitions or items for them is, I think, a trend that's going to continue. We haven't really touched on it in this conversation yet, though, Dave. I think, again, it benefits the consumer, benefits the providers, but I do think that fraud detection is another area that will continue to grow from an AI perspective. It's unfortunate, right, that these tools have become so accessible, because typically those that don't have ethics are those that will adopt them more quickly. And so the bad actors get at them before the good actors have a chance to kind of lock them down. And so fraud detection, we've seen a number of ransomware attacks, growing cyber attacks, especially in our industry, right? Largely because the data tends to be standardized, right? There's MISMO standards in lending. And so the data gets standardized. And so it becomes more beneficial in black markets. And so we think that's going to be another area. And I do think that, I'll touch on what Vishal said, computer vision, right? Computer vision to the next level of what we've already seen to date. So to date, we've seen the computer vision, right, being able to identify things like, right, objects and even condition, right? We didn't touch on condition earlier, but imagine being able to go into a search experience as a consumer, and if you don't want a house that is move-in ready because you're a fix and flip or you want to do renovations, being able to say, I want a kitchen that is of this condition, right, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those tools are available today. The next generation that was going to be leveraging this from a consumer perspective to allow them to reimagine the home, whether that's reimagining the home as they're entering it through the buying process, whether it's sellers providing kind of stagings to to potential buyers that can allow them to kind of look and see what the house might look like. Whether it's renovations that you might want to do, whether it's same footprint renovations, whether it's expansion of footprint renovations, whether it's just taking your existing inventory of furniture and plopping it in, seeing what it looks like from an imagination perspective. Those kind of tools, both non-immersive and immersive, I think will be continued trends in the AI space that are generally around computer vision. Taking that to the next step then is that kind of the costing. So now that I see that, imagine a buyer situation where you have 4 potential homes, and you have like this vision statement from a consumer. This is what I really want. And now you can take through these tools and say, well, okay, this house might be missing a bathroom. This house might be a little less, maybe a little more outdated. This house might be, missing square footage that I need. Now I can take models and reimagine all of those, as if they met my vision, and I can normalize the pricing across them. And so as a buyer, before I even get into the house, I have tools that allow me to kind of see what it would look like if it was my dream home. Those are very powerful tools. And so I think that's the last. And then the last thing I'll say is immersive. I touched on immersive. I do think it's a trend that's going to continue. And I've mentioned this before. The 3D walkthroughs of houses are very good. They generally do a nice job. But I do think that this concept of reimagining and being able to plop things, that's an immersive experience. And I think from a buyer's journey perspective, a lot of time is spent in evaluating not just the house, but the neighborhood. And so I actually think future external immersive experiences where you can walk the neighborhood, look at the house externally from different angles, see how the sunlight gets at different times of day, traffic patterns that come by the property, map out where you're going to walk your dog. These are all things that are important from the emotional purchase price of the consumer. And I think that those technologies will expand the buyer opportunities going forward as well.
Steve, maybe just one thing, and Dave, to just build on a thread that you picked up on, that I just want to underscore that there will be a lot of behind the scenes applications that can help the middle and back office across mortgage and insurance. That's worth spending a moment on, whether it's enhanced underwriting and appraisals and supporting teams by analyzing documents from closing packages to asset and income statements, highlighting pertinent investor requirements, servicer guides and the like, whether it's on the insurance side and helping with really claims management and actually automating a lot of the claim processing workflows, refining based on past claims detail and using generative AI to analyze all of that past claims data. From a compliance perspective, the point I was made, like a personalized guide to gauge compliance, risks, and leverage best practices. And then truly in the corporate function realm, whether it's on the legal front, creating draft legal documents and analyzing documents, or even generating code from an IT perspective, smart code generation to help really developers code faster and reduce errors. I think there's tremendous application, not only on that very consumer customer facing side, but assisting your LOs, your agents, and frankly, your middle and back office as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. So I'm looking at the clock here. And so as we get closer to the end here, maybe let's talk a little bit about how we make this actionable, for the folks in attendance. So, Vishal, I'll direct this to you to start. It's important for financial institutions, of course, to identify a provider that offers, the technology to help them differentiate themselves in this space. From your team's perspective, what do you advise institutions that are trying to find that ideal provider? And then building on that, how are you seeing companies kind of get started? What are the first things they're thinking about or what that are in front of them that they really need to be considering as they get started on these journeys?
Sure. So from a technology perspective and partner perspective, first of all, the most immediate place where you're going to be able to deploy Gen AI is starting with the software you may already have that has Gen AI capabilities already resident in it. So whether that's Enterprise ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, that's often the place where folks do get started before you think about building something, getting the maximum value from the stuff you're already buying, that you're already paying for. If you are going to build something, there are two primary decision points that we often see our clients taking. One is, where is your data going to sit? Meaning what platform? For bigger companies, it's often what platforms are you already on, whether that's AWS or Google or Azure. For smaller companies, it may be less of an issue depending on your cloud strategy. Secondly, what model are you using? A few months ago, I might have said that if you were on AWS, you were most likely to pick an Anthropic as your model, as they were the most capable model that sits on top of AWS. If it was Google, you'd pick their Gemini models. If it was Azure, you'd pick OpenAI. But it's changing, and we're starting to see a lot more moving to more of an open cloud approach. And so, I think the simple advice I give is, one, make sure you're clear on what your cloud strategy is first, which could include, I could be on any cloud and it doesn't matter to me. Secondly, pick a model that's based on your needs. So there is a lot more parity that's tied to horse race across many of the leaders today, be it OpenAI with GPT-4, Gemini Ultra from Google, or Claude 3 from Anthropic. I think they're a lot closer to parity than not. But those are really the frontier models. These are the models that can allow you to look at images and interpret them. They can follow complex instructions from a very detailed prompt. They can do math. They can follow more in-depth logic. They can write code. But for a lot of applications, you might not need that much power. And so there is an opportunity to think about more of a step down from those frontier models or even an open source model. That's generally what I'd say on the technology front. To the question around where we see our clients getting started, I think in this mortgage and real estate sphere, I think a lot of folks are starting first with, what is my Gen AI strategy and roadmap, and spending 8 or 10 weeks defining their Gen AI strategy, including those high value use cases and opportunities, and then developing a roadmap around outcomes, people, and technology, all that needs to be put in place. A bit beyond mortgage and real estate, for folks that are a bit further ahead, you're seeing more of a focused solution build, building a solution for that high value use case or use cases, thinking about future workflows and technology capabilities, and what people are needed. And I think in parallel to that, you're seeing a lot of folks think about the governance and the operating model. What is needed from a governance and op model perspective? What's my plan around responsible AI as I start to handle sensitive and complex data? And how do I make sure I'm getting to the right outcomes? How do I make sure I still have that human in the loop is a core part of this, so that you don't let AI just run on steroids. I think I agree with Steve early on. In the very near term, this is very much a human still in the loop, and that's what we're seeing across our clients.
Super helpful. Thank you. So Steve, pivot to you real quick. We can all see the benefits of things like personalization, easing the time it takes to complete different steps of the buying process. But how can financial institutions ensure that through the solutions they use, they remain a part of the journey for someone that's just beginning their career or their family, all the way through to somebody that's in the process of downsizing, retiring, what have you?
Yeah, I think I'm going to probably, I echo some of the things that Michelle just mentioned with regards to kind of where to begin. It's kind of the same thing at an institution that's not necessarily in the space. And I like to point this out sometimes, and Michelle will probably back in this. Forget Gen AI for a second, right? Traditional AI was still in its kind of immaturity from an implementation standpoint as a broad-based tool set for most enterprises, right? And so we just leaped to Gen AI, and it's grown exponentially simply because it is more natural in its space, right? And so you don't have the same challenge of having to have the particular data scientists to do it if you just use the out-of-box stuff. So I think as I think about it, right, and I actually think about some of the Radiant Home Genius experience, if you want to remain part of the journey, you have to think about those tools as an enterprise. And what are the tools that I want? And is it a buy versus a build decision? The first thing you got to just recognize, I think, is that AI is here to stay. Like it's not going away. There may be regulations out in the future, right? It may get this or that, but it's here to stay. And so leaning into it, testing it, evaluating where it could be beneficial, I think is critical for institutions of all sizes. And it doesn't mean you're going to build stuff for yourself. You may end up partnering with somebody or buying something. But I think it is important to evaluate it. And our experience was to like Vishal mentioned, is set up a steering committee, right? Set up a corporate-wide steering committee, representation from lots of different stakeholders within that, discuss, right, what it meant to not only be in the AI or Gen AI space, but then also how do we empower our people within the organization to help us on that trajectory. And so, as part of that, we created sandboxes, right? So these are internal to the company. We leverage some of the tools that are out there through some of the cloud service providers, created these sandboxes, gave instruction to the employee base and said, hey, here's what you can do, go use it, try it out, and help us do it. So I think that allows you then to evaluate, what you can do, both from your own data resources perspective. Data is still the gold, right? It's still the oil. It drives it. And so you can use kind of the generalized models. The LLMs provide a ton of data effectively and require much less data to be able to develop a model that might be beneficial, right? Or if you want that kind of personalized value, then you're going down a different path of still being able to fine tune models or adapt them to a domain, and that requires a different skill set. But I think by setting up an organization that allows you to kind of steer those conversations around what your best use cases are, there is a FOMO out there, right? There is a hype around it. And I think it's important from a business perspective that we understand what is most important to our business and most important to our consumers and target those actions that will drive that specifically and not get too caught up in the hype of it as presented in the marketplace.
All right. So just to underscore, Steve, your point around that customer consumer lens, making sure you are actively thinking about customer and consumer frictions, experiences, and the like, and not just trying to design what everyone around the table thinks would be best suited for that consumer, but actually making sure you're taking that lens as well. I think it has tremendous value.
In our space, right, it's highly regulated, right? Everybody on this, most of them on this call are regulated, right, by somebody. We have fair housing laws, we have RESPA, right? We have lots of guidance on appraisals. GSEs have requirements and restrictions. There's a lot there. And so figuring out where and when and how it's going to give the greatest ROI takes some what I'll call personalized time.
All right, looking at the cloud, we've got a fair number of questions here. I'm just going to dovetail. I'm looking at one of them. I'm going to dovetail a little bit and before we close out. But we've talked a lot about the possibilities, but we really haven't gone too deeply into like some of the risks to navigate. Just curious, building on some of the things you were just talking about, what other cautionary notes you might give to the group?
You got to bring us down, Dave. I mean, come on.
I got to land the plane. Sorry.
And look, there's plenty in generative AI in particular, right? We know the out of the box hallucinations issues, and I do think that as a result, it's something that evaluate things internally before you evaluate them externally. Bias is something that can be embedded. Bias is obviously a huge issue with regards to the lending space and the real estate space, whether it's redlining issues, whether it's actually in underwriting and how you look at that. So you have to have the human in the loop at all times. Cost is going to be one, right? I said this before, like these models to use in production of an actual experience can be very expensive very quickly. Unfortunately, they're not. None of the cloud providers or the other technology providers do a very good job of allowing you as a developer to understand what the real cost is going to be. So cautionary tale there. Reputational risk, right? Clearly must be concerned about the kind of a cautionary tale about what your experience is going to be to your consumers if the models don't go right, because they're there. And then the last risk, I think, is actually one that I would call creative atrophy and maybe staff disillusionment. So we have these two concepts where if you rely too much on the AI, then you create atrophy of the creative muscles that your staff has. And so how do you find that right balance between it? So we have cost risks, reputational risks, staffing risks, and bias risks that we have.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Vishal, thank you so much. Appreciate everyone attending today. I'm going to turn it back over to help us land the plane here. And thanks again for everybody taking the time today.